Aaron Ehasz and Justin Richmond are two television writers who know how to write a good ending for their characters. And even though Season 6 isn't the final season of The Dragon Prince, it clearly proves that they've known all along where they were going to take these characters. While not the creator of Avatar, Aaron Ehasz seemed to set the tone for The Last Airbender as its head writer, in such a way that Korra was considered unable to pick up the emotional pieces that he had left behind when he did not continue with the production. When Aaron Ehasz and Justin Richmond put out The Dragon Prince for the world to see, many fans fell in love with their characters instantly, very similar to the original cast of Avatar. What we didn't know was whether or not the seeds planted back in Book 1 would blossom to the same kind of beautiful ending that the characters of The Last Airbender received. But if anything, I think where we have seen Viren and Claudia's characters go in particular is proof that they've already taken the characters to even more intense places than The Last Airbender could allow. So today, I want to talk about the tragic family of the Dragon Prince, Viren, Claudia, and even Soren. Now, I would say that Avatar and the Dragon Prince both operated with a fun structure of there being two key families, one good and one bad. In Avatar, this was Aang, Katara, and Sokka as the good family, if you will, and then the literal family, the bad family, if you will, being Zuko, Azula, Iroh, and the Fire Lord Ozai. In The Dragon Prince, we have this with Callum and Ezran being real brothers in the same family, with Rayla being included with them as well as part of their group dynamic. And then we have Viren, Claudia, and Soren as the evil or bad family. Interestingly, instead of starting out enemies and becoming allies like Aang did with Zuko, the Dragon Prince families start off as best friends, but ultimately end up not just on different paths, but opposing sides. Across 6 seasons, we see these two families turn away from each other and begin to attack each other as their goals become contradictory. By the end of this, we saw Claudia lose her leg before being abandoned by her own father. It's tragic to go back to Season 1 and see how simple and innocent she was, just a funny girl who wanted to make her family happy, and who treated Callum and Ezran like close friends. In many ways, she is the Azula of the Dragon Prince, an example of how a dark father's harsh standards can lead you down a dark path where all you know in the end is how to attack others. But Claudia still manages to be extremely unique with how close she was to our main characters in the beginning, and how much of what she does is for the sake of not conquering, but to try and keep her father alive. In the beginning, Viren seems to mean well too, using dark magic primarily to help others. Even in the case of healing Soren when he got sick, it was still to help someone. Sure, it was his own son, but it was an innocent life that he didn't want to see end. It's because of him that so many humans didn't starve, though of course that came at the expense of the lava golem. Even in the first few episodes of the series, Viren acts as if he's willing to make the sacrifice he has to in order to do things right by King Haro. Like with the latest season following his resurrection, he wants not just to prove his brotherly love for Haro, but to also make up for what he now thinks he did wrong. He had proposed dark magic solutions on and on for years at this point. It was what he was best at, but it was something Haro saw as karmically harmful to them. As Haro explains in episode 2 of book 1, it's a blood price that they always have to pay later, and the way he saw it, it was time for him to pay that price by being killed by the Moon Shadow assassins. Viren wanted to offer himself up in Haro's place once he realized everything he had done wrong, but Haro unfortunately did not allow Viren to even suggest it, instead thinking that Viren had come up with more selfish ideas of using dark magic. As interesting as it would be to explore a timeline where Viren was allowed to do what he wanted for Haro, the one we got had Viren deciding to take the role of Lord Protector of the land, essentially king when Haro died. This death seemed to be part of a plan Viren orchestrated when he realized how much Haro had come to hate him. Some fans hold the theory that Viren used the two-headed serpent to switch the soul of Haro into this bird, which would have left Viren with the opportunity to show Haro himself how his plans for rule could achieve the ultimate good for humans. After this, it's amazing how fast Viren began to lean into darkness, however. His coronation is cut short when it's revealed that Ezran and Callum are alive, but he begins to orchestrate to have his own son Soren murder them so that he can maintain control over Catullus. This was a wild back and forth of Viren's morality in the first season, but one I think ultimately makes sense. While Viren does care for Haro, a lot of that may have just been because of Haro's power, even if Viren doesn't consciously realize it. Viren likes to feel special, and working for the king does that for him. Haro recognizes the issue when he tells Viren that he needs to remember his place as a servant of the kingdom, and that's when Viren's true colors begin to show. What Haro sensed from Viren was this desire for validation for another dark magic scheme, one where Viren was going to give his own life, it would seem, but one that would have made him feel like the most important person to the king that he had tried so hard to please. When Haro made it clear that Viren needs to be humbled, however, Viren's entire worldview suddenly shifted. Viren is essentially a narcissist who fixates on using good to give himself a sense of validation. When Viren wanted to die for Haro, it was because he saw Haro as the most important person in the kingdom, its ruler. But when Haro made it clear that he no longer favored Viren, Viren himself became the most important person in the kingdom in his own head. He had likely always imagined himself as taking over essentially if Haro died, leading Ezrin if nothing else, and seeing himself as the wise man who would manipulate him into ruling the way Viren believed was right. When Haro tries to humble Viren, this killed Haro in the mind of Viren already. In Viren's mind, if Haro could not see how great Viren and his plans were, then Haro was not what was best for Kitsune, and only Viren could fill that role in his perception. With that in mind, he did a 180 in his actions, going from wanting to lay down his life so Haro can remain king, to making sure Haro would die so that he could use dark magic whenever he wanted to lead humans into what he thought would be a better age. The problem with Viren's mindset is that he would claim it to be about looking out for him and his people, but it was clearly a lot more selfish. Haro is the ruler who looks out for his people, and that includes not just his kingdom, but humans as a whole, and to some degree, magical creatures too. While he is ultimately willing to let some magical creatures die in order to save very many humans, even that is seen as a sacrifice, and one that he comes to regret in the end. Viren is much higher on the scale of self-centeredness, however. Haro would do anything to help his people, but Viren would do anything to anyone else to help his people. What he wants is glory, and he's willing to kill other creatures or even the king of Kitsune in order to get it. Erebos, of course, convinced Viren that he could become ruler of all of Zadia, one who would harness the magic of the world against the creatures who naturally owned it, but all that changed when Viren died. When first resurrected at the beginning of Season 4, Viren was already showing signs of deep change. Across the next 2 seasons, he would show that all he really wanted now was for his family to be happy. Despite his disdain for elves, he ends up just wanting Claudia to give up on trying to keep him alive and to enjoy what little time he does have left with him and her new partner Terry. Despite this resurrection of the body, Viren's true resurrection of the soul isn't until the end of his 30-day trial that Erebos gave him, at the end of which he needed to sacrifice a child to stay alive. Viren could have done this himself with Erebos and Viren's hybrid child that was made just to be destroyed, but in the end, Viren doesn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he accepts his death, only for the latest season to have opened with him still alive. Weirder still, he suddenly has an even more profound change in how he is acting. Now, in previous videos, I thought Claudia had sacrificed her own leg in order to complete the ceremony, but instead, she actually lost that leg while in that heptapod form during her battle with Callum and Ezrin. Claudia ends up killing the hybrid child for Viren, allowing him to live, but when we see her there without her leg, covered in blood, we can see that the real sacrifice is about her. This homunculus that Erebos created was just a sort of stand-in symbol for all the pain and suffering that Claudia had been through, all the sacrifices that she had made and that Viren had asked her to make in one way or another in order to attain his goals. After this, his only goal is to return to Kitsune and make up for what he has done, and in doing so, he hopes that Claudia will learn to do what is right, but unfortunately, they both only played deeper into Erebos' plan. When it comes to Claudia, she doesn't seem to be born with the kind of narcissism that her father has, but instead her empathy is something that he ultimately wields against her. It's not narcissism that drives her to do what she does the way it is with Viren, but rather it's her empathy and love for her father that causes her to become something even darker. Early on, her direction could have been a lot different if not for Viren, as Claudia mostly saw the side of him that was loving. Viren cares for his own, but he's not afraid to use them for his own glory, to exalt himself above the rest of the world. It's because of his supposed desire to uplift his family and his kingdom that he does such dark things and gets Claudia involved with them. Claudia, as a more empathetic person who believes in love, has spent a lifetime learning from this man that in order to show love, you have to be willing to sacrifice, and the beginning of this season showed just how deep that message had been burned into Claudia's soul, with the figurative loss of her leg as a sacrifice for her father. I cannot express how disturbing this opening was for a kid's show. Sure, it's a more mature niche Netflix kid's show, but Jesus Christ, Claudia being abandoned by her father after she lost a leg in battle trying to resurrect him by bringing Erebos out of his prison was just so hard to watch, and it wasn't even the most disturbing thing this season considering what happened to Erebos' daughter. But to make this moment even more devastating, the newly resurrected Viren has developed empathy and thus guilt, and he ends up just abandoning his daughter with one leg right there by the ocean. This is to go atone for his own sins, but Claudia begging him to stay because of what she had done for him was heartbreaking. It shocked Viren to see how much Claudia had lost to try and help him, because he thought that he had taught that you always sacrifice for your kids, not the other way around, but that wasn't necessarily true by his actual actions. Viren had his noble moments as the leader of his household, but he was constantly putting his kids in danger and asking them to take on darkness for him. It wasn't just leading Claudia into the realm of dark magic, but he even asked his son Soren to eliminate 2 children that were friends of his in order for their family to basically steal the kingdom away from their family friends. And this was with Haro's own death already being because Viren stole the dragon egg and claimed to have destroyed it. Claudia had not been taught to sacrifice for the people you love, but rather that the children need to sacrifice things that they care about in order to appease their father. Viren had replaced the royal family, believing his ideas for the future of humanity were what mattered most, and Claudia let herself believe that this meant that her father was not just more important than the king, but more important than her. Losing her leg was no small loss. She cried about how he was leaving her despite everything she had done for him, with her just standing there with one leg, crying covered in blood. Her life was irrevocably made worse by this, no matter what magical enhancements she would later use to keep herself walking. This is the sort of transformation she watched her father go through in life, slowly becoming more purple-faced and black-eyed and undeniably monstrous as he did what he said was best for humanity, turning his own army into fire monsters in order to go to war with elves. Claudia had also seen what it means to oppose her father, and with the help of her illusions, saw just how far Soren would go to put an end to their family if it meant sparing Zadia from Viren's plans. Soren had become the child willing to kill their father, and Claudia had to become the one willing to give everything up to bring him back then. I've brought up The Last Airbender a bit in this video, not because I think the projects are too similar, but rather the similarities they do have highlight such crazy differences and what makes their character writing so very interesting. One of my favorite scenes in Avatar The Last Airbender was one at the very end where Katara has to subdue Azula, and when she succeeds, we can see just how unhinged Azula is. She had admitted earlier in the series of being something of a twisted monster, but after all this development, her endgame was just being this tragic loser. She was someone who had no choice but to dedicate herself entirely to the cause in front of her, allowing herself to become a twisted monster. But when she lost, she became nothing but that wild beast who was trying to destroy everything she could, just flailing about and shooting fire, trying to escape like an animal trapped in the corner. Claudia is a very similar character, but not in a way that feels unoriginal despite it having so much of the same depth and the same writing team behind it. Claudia is also a character who has been pushed to an absolute extreme by her father, but what makes her so interesting isn't even how much further they push Claudia with the self-abuse such as losing her leg. Azula was an amazing character who was a victim of structure more than anything, a structure and hierarchy that expected the most of her. Claudia had the most expected of her as well, but in her case, what she did was out of love, and that's what makes it such a bizarrely fascinating watch. You can watch the scene of Viren confronting Claudia about her leg over and over again, and it never stops hurting. Aaron and Justin have such a talent for taking these characters near the end of their journeys and just turning them around so they can look back at themselves and see what they were before, to see how messed up they'd become. Every sweet, innocent moment with Claudia just became so painful to rewatch when you see where this leads her, with it all just being sweet little seeds planted that blossom into the most horrifying moment in the Season 6 opening. But these are just my assortment of thoughts on the craziness of this dark family and the Dragon Prince. Let me know your thoughts on them in the comments down below or over in our Discord server. Link is in the pinned comment down below. Just make sure you ask for the Dragon Prince role to get access to the chat, as well as any other cartoons you like. See you guys then.